and welcome to Improbable Things. I'm J. Grace Pennington, and this is my podcast where I share 6 improbable things before breakfast, which are 6 things about reading, writing, or sometimes about science fiction. So I have my 6 themes lined up, and let's get started. So before I actually get started, I'm going to add in a little 7th bonus thing, which is that I found out this past week that my younger brothers have been listening to this podcast, and that just made me so happy because I love them so much. They live far away. I don't get to spend a ton of time with them, and so just knowing that they are participating in this with me was just completely made my day. And I want to give a special shout out to my brother Adam, who is just like the biggest fan of my writing, and apparently really loves the podcast and has been spreading the word about it. So love you, Adam. Thank you so much for listening. So now getting into my regular 6 things. Number 1, I wanted to share a little bit more about how Firmament Humanoid is going. I have been working consistently on it, even though I'm definitely still in a slump with it. And you may be able to tell from my voice, I had a little bit of a cold this past week. Nothing too crazy, but still, you know how that just kind of muddles your head. You don't want to do much of anything, but I did keep up with my word count. So I did break 20,000 words on it. I'm approximately around 23,000 now, which is good progress. Like that should be more than a third of the way through in theory. But yeah, definitely kind of still in that slump. Even though I got to some pretty exciting parts, I'm just not really feeling it. But that's especially when you have to push through and just keep going. My view has always been that writer's block does not exist. You just keep putting words down, even if they're about the worst words that have ever been written. Just keep putting words down, and you can always push past it. Number 2, the thing that I have been able to stay excited about as I'm writing is the characters and their relationships, which really is just the heart of all of my writing. It's also at the heart of all my favorite books. Like that's what I care about in stories and in writing, is the people and just their thoughts and emotions, and especially their relationships with each other. Like that's what always gets me excited. When I come up with a new idea, it's exploring those kinds of things that makes me really want to do it. And there was a moment that really reminded me of that, because of course in this series I've been at it for so long now, and I really do care about these characters as friends, and I want to, spend this time with them, and I want to see their growth and see their relationships develop and all of that. And so that really does keep me going. And there was, again, just a little moment that reminded me of that in my writing yesterday, where a few very small spoilers that shouldn't be too bad, just maybe intrigue you a little bit. Some of the crew, including Andy and the captain, were on this planet where the weather tends to change very rapidly and have very dramatic swings. And so it would, that'd be really hot one moment, and then suddenly like this wind would pick up and it'd be super cold. So they're just trying to do what they've come there to do, and they're trying to figure all these things out. All this stuff is going on. And in the middle of it, at one point, Andy was kind of standing by herself, just like wrapping her arms around herself, really cold, in the middle of one of these cold spells. And even though there's all this other stuff going on, the captain's trying to give orders and sort all this stuff out. He kind of beckons over to Andy, has her come over to him, and then just puts his arm around her and holds her close to him to keep her warm, because he's such a sort of second father figure to her. And she was just able to kind of have a little warmth and a little shelter from the wind up against him while he was, giving his orders. And when she thanked him later, he was like, well, I was just doing what your dad would have done if he was here, since the doctor wasn't on that mission. And it was just, that moment to me was just really sweet. And it was really what I love in this series, is that the people on the ship, they really are a family. And Andy really is surrounded by, even though her own biological family history is more than a little complicated, and she's had a lot of rejection, from her family, she has this, not only her father and her brother, her sort of immediate family, but she has all of this extended family around her that's just been there for her for most of her life. And that is what really draws me in. And so I really try to find moments like those where that can really shine And hopefully the readers can connect with it, but even just for me, it just keeps me going because I remember how much I love these people and how much, I want to get them through all these things that are happening to them. So number 3, especially since I've been hitting this slump, I've just been like, well, I really need my inspiration right now, more than ever. And so not only things like that, but just my other, of course, it's no secret that a huge inspiration for this series is Star Trek. And I haven't watched any Star Trek for a while because I finished up most of the series a while back. I'm supposed to be watching Enterprise, but it's kind of boring to me, so I haven't finished it. But it's just been a while since I revisited any of the older series, and I was just like, you know what, I really need that right now. I really need to like get excited about the same things that excite me about Firmament are the things that excite me about Star Trek, which is the characters and relationships, but also just the ways that you can kind of come up with new things and explore all these different ideas and, have all this mystery. It's just like all the same things that I love about one. I mean, that's why I created Firmament, because I love all those things. And so I was just like, I need to watch some Star Trek. So I sat down last night and went into the original series again. Just kind of picked up at some point because I started rewatching it when my baby was born, and I got maybe like 7 or 8 episodes in, and I was like, well, I really don't really want to rewatch those again, so I just picked up right after that and watched an episode called The Dagger of the Mind. And oh my goodness, every time I watch it, I'm like, this is so much cornier than I even remembered, and yet so much better. Like, I'm smiling the whole time I'm watching it, and yet like definitely cringing because it's just so corny. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna hope that Firmament is not quite as corny as that, although I know it is a little bit, because I honestly just kind of do enjoy that to a certain extent. But it's just so good. Like, it's all the same things, like I said, that I love, and so I hope that it'll kind of get my writing fired up again. But regardless, I'm just enjoying it. I might just go all the way through. I might just start original series, go through the movies, go through Next Generation, etc., because I just love it. And it can be kind of like written off as, writing related. Like, I have to do it for my inspiration. So clearly that's how I should frame it. So anyway, number 4, I wanted to talk a little bit about reading in general, because a lot of people have asked me how I read so much because I have a pretty full life. I have 3 little kids, 3 and under, and obviously they keep me pretty busy. And yet I'm able to read so much each year, and I'm hoping to read even more this year, although my ultimate goal is still a little secret, just between me and my Goodreads goal. But I wanted to share a little bit about how I do that. And the thing is, everyone's so different when it comes to reading habits. Like, for instance, one way that I do read so much is I do a lot of audiobooks. And I know there's some people that just don't enjoy audiobooks or can't get into them or can't focus on them. So obviously that doesn't work for everyone. But it does work for me. I probably do about half and half, audiobooks and, hardcover or hard copy, paper books. And so that helps a lot. But even with that, I can't do as much of that as I used to be able to, because if my kids are awake, I can probably listen to about like 1 sentence, if even, before somebody's either coming to ask me something or somebody's like screaming at someone else or falling and hurting themselves and needing a kiss or whatever. So it doesn't work for me really to listen to anything for most of the day. But one thing I have found is like, with both kinds of reading, but just focusing on audiobooks for now, is just taking those tiny amounts of time. Like, sometimes I'll be like, okay, I only have, 10 minutes while I'm washing the dishes once the girls have gone to bed, and then after that I have to do something else, but I can listen for those 10 minutes, it's still making progress, and I'm always surprised how much progress I can make by just snatching up those small moments of time. So I do prioritize a lot of audiobooks, but then I kind of have the same outlook with reading, real books or just the paper books as well, traditional books. And that is that a little is better than none. And I used to, there were a few years there where I didn't read much at all. And it was partly because I had gotten into this mindset of like, okay, if I don't have time to sit down and read for, an hour or whatever, then I don't have time to do it. And that's just not true. Like, again, you can read for 10 minutes here or there. And a lot of times, honestly, I just read a chapter or two a day. And of course, chapter length can vary widely from book to book. But one way that I've found that helps me do that, because another problem is that when I read, I do get distracted because I'm very fidgety. And so my mind will tend to wander, and it helps if I can do something with my hands. And so honestly, I found I have like a yogurt shake that I make in the blender with stevia and cocoa powder and all this good stuff. And so every afternoon when the girls are taking naps and having their quiet time, I make my shake, and I have this like big cup full of, my nice drink, and I have my straw, and I settle down with whatever book I'm reading, and I just start drinking and reading, and it just like helps occupy my hands and helps my mind from wandering quite as much. So I can really sit down and focus, and usually I just read until I'm finished drinking, and that usually does last me like a chapter or two depending on the book. And sometimes if I'm really feeling able to focus, or if I don't have something else I need to get to right after that, I will read longer. But a lot of times that's all the reading I do in a day. And it does help that I am a very fast reader, but even so, I'm making progress every day on reading all the books that I want to read. And so again, I just have to try the same mindset with my writing, with everything. All of my goals is that a little is better than none. So I definitely encourage whatever you can do. If reading is a goal of yours, to get a little bit of it in each day, then you're making progress. And that's a win in my book. And so number 5, onto my currently reading. So the audiobook I'm listening to right now is a Harlan Coben audiobook. It's called Home. I'm going to say I'm probably like 2/3, 3/4 of the way through right now. And I don't remember if I've talked about Harlan Coben books on this podcast before, but my mom really enjoys them, and so sometimes I'll read hers when she's finished with them or whatever. And so I've been listening to this one, and I generally don't really enjoy them, which is I've only read a few, but the weird thing is I wouldn't say they're my favorite, partly because I always finish them and I'm kind of like let down by the ending, and I'm just kind of like, why did I spend my time reading that? But he is such a skilled writer in how he really draws you in. Like, I'll be like pulled into the story, whatever it is, and no matter how little I feel like I care about it, for the whole time, like super like pulled into it the whole time. And I not only enjoy that, but I am fascinated by it as a writer, and I would love to be able to do that. So I always hope I can learn from him and his skill. So I'm reading that. So far, it seems about like the rest. Like, I obviously don't agree with, the morality, but the writing's really good, and, so we'll see when I get to the ending if I have the same reaction I have to all of those other books that I've read. So number 6, kind of to expand on that a little bit, I mentioned that in Harlan Coben's books, I tend to find the endings just a bit of a letdown. And so I've been thinking about satisfying endings and how to do that, because obviously that's a huge concern for me as a writer. There's not much that's more of a bummer than to get to the end of a book, especially if you've really been enjoying it, and just kind of like feel disappointed in the ending and unsatisfied, and it really kind of ruins the whole book for you. And so endings are hard though. Like, I've heard a lot of advice that is really good but really hard to do. One piece of advice that I've always heard is what you have to do with an ending is you have to give people what they expect, but not how they expect it. Because if you're not giving people what they expect, then of course they're going to be disappointed. But if you give them it exactly the way they were expecting, then they're going to feel, disappointed because there was no surprises and they saw it coming. And you want to be surprised by a book, and yet you can't. You still have to be satisfied in your expectations, even if you didn't fully realize what those expectations were. You still have them somewhere, and you're still going to be disappointed if they aren't met in some way, and yet it has to be in a creative way that they can't see coming. So that's obviously very difficult. And one really good example that I heard taught is in Lord of the Rings. And if you haven't read or seen Lord of the Rings, I'm really sorry because this is obviously a huge spoiler. But in Lord of the Rings, obviously the entire saga is about having the Ring of Power be destroyed. So that's what everyone is wanting to see happen at the end. And if that didn't happen, I have to say that would be like probably the hugest bummer ever, because you've just read for hundreds and thousands of pages only to be disappointed at the very end, and that would just be pretty awful. So obviously the ring does get destroyed, but I think what you kind of do have in mind the whole time is that Frodo's gonna like get to Mount Doom, take the ring, throw it in the fire, and just have victory. And if that happened, I do think you'd have a moment of letdown where you go like, oh, like it just feels too easy. Despite everything that's come before it, you need some kind of like big showdown and build up at the very end. And so instead of Frodo just throwing it, what you have is a fight. You know, he decides not to throw it in, and then you have a fight with Gollum, who bites his finger off and falls into the burning lava below with the ring. And so it kind of gives you this thing at the end where you're like, oh, like you didn't see it coming, even though ultimately you did see it coming. Like it's hard for sure, very hard. And another thing that I've thought a lot about is that you don't, even though you can't be predictable, you can't be so unpredictable that you undermine the rest of the book. And I have found that with some of the Harlan Coben, I feel like, where, for instance, one of the stories, almost the whole thing was about secrets and how secrets would like destroy you and destroy your family and like cause all this damage. Like that felt like the message of the whole book. And then you come to the very end and it's like, oh, this person killed this other person, and him and the police detective are going to just like keep it a secret and not tell anybody. I'm like, well, then why did you just spend all this time telling me that keeping secrets is so damaging, and then yet they come to the end and just keep doing, and you just start this new like secret that if it ever came out would completely destroy this person's life. Like, I don't know, I'm like, I just get that feeling like, why did I just sit through that? And I've thought the same about some of, even though I love Christopher Nolan's films, some of them tend to do that a little bit too. Like he gives these big twist endings, which are fun, but sometimes you just feel it just feels a little bit empty, because you're like, well, if you're just going to undermine everything